Hello, Simone. Today we are going to be talking about an interesting phenomenon, which is that individuals who have racist tendencies or
Okay.
who are skeptical about Jewish or gay people have been turning against Trump in droves recently.
What is
Uh,
going on there? Yeah, it does seem like this trend.
and very aggressively. So it used to be that in every election cycle, your famous racist would have these moments where they might, tongue in cheek support a Democratic candidate to try to
Yes.
make them look bad. And so people couldn't say that they were supporting the Republicans. That is not what is happening anymore. They hate Trump and they are actively attempting to get their fan bases to vote against him.
Really,
So
because I was mostly assuming that these were tongue-in-cheek, harmful
no, and
endorsements.
I'll provide a contrasting example here that is still tongue in cheek, which is Curtis Yarvin. But if you look at Nick Fuentes, Richard Spencer,
Mm.
David Duke, or
Mhm.
Leather Apron Club, they have
Mhm.
all done aggressively anti-Trump messages before the election, asking their followers not to vote.
Ooh la
Uh,
la.
the gist of why they're doing this is they have this perception of if this party cannot be actively and aggressively anti-Jewish, racist, and homophobic, then I'm just going to go home. And they don't like how far it's moved on those issues. Whereas, we basically respond with,
I'm leaving.
Okay, then. That was always allowed.
so we're going to go through every one of these individuals, what they've said about Trump recently, go through some of the arguments that they've used for why they're leaving. And
Ooh.
we're also going to discuss the effects of this on the Republican Party, largely really positive. Um,
Okay.
very, very positive. If the left could achieve this with their toxic, racist, bigoted faction, that far Wokies, they
Mhm.
would be able to win mainstream elections.
Wow.
So that's one thing to note here. The second thing that we're going to talk about is all of these individuals who have this weird, I'd almost say sort of aesthetic cargo cult idea of what it means to be a conservative. None of them are above repopulation rate, and none of them seem to have a happy marriage.
Hmm.
Jerry, marriage is a lot of work. We have to plan for a house, plan for a baby. Babies cost a lot of money.
What? Babies don't cost money, they make money. Especially those little white ones.
Look, you have to get serious about this.
Or what, huh? You gonna hit me?
No, I'm not gonna hit you, Jerry.
You don't wanna beat me or screw me? What kind of marriage is this? Bring a book.
And this is something I really want to focus on because these are not individuals. If they're coming to you and saying, I have this version of what America used to be and how America used to be great that you can follow and learn from, what I would point out is just from the evidence, you can see they're wrong. Whatever they're selling you doesn't work and is short for this world. All right, so let's go through. First, I would start with the counterexample, Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin did do a don't vote for Trump piece. But what he really said was, whoever we're voting for should be made dictator. And I'd take a Biden dictatorship over a Trump presidency. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
this, and he's like, look, I'm a monarchist and I'm a radical monarchist.
He doesn't hate
And
the player, he hates the game.
he doesn't hate the player, he hates the game. And you know what? Whatever. Like, that's a fun based point. I like Curtis a lot. And I think
Yeah.
that he is a solid and truly independent intellectual that disagrees with us on tons of stuff. Why Curtis works as a good counterexample here is while he is someone who, if a presidential candidate was seen as being endorsed by him, their reputation could be hurt, he doesn't have an ounce of genuine anti-gay bias, anti-Semitic bias, or racial bias in any of his works, despite what some people would tell you.
He's
So
awesome.
that's him. Where technically he's saying I would actually prefer Trump, but like I'm not going to put that in writing, given how it could hurt his candidacy. Next, we have Nick Fuentes, who is extremely anti-immigrant. He's a Catholic integralist. He wants the United States to operate. Basically, he wants a globalist Catholic monarchy to rule the world, or a Catholic government of some sort, theocracy, following the syllabus of errors written by Pope Pius IX. I don't want to go too into theology here. I find the integralist movement pretty interesting. Mostly, I find it silly that you could want a globalist Catholic monarchy to rule the world, but then think our country can't survive with a mostly Catholic immigrant population, which is what the Hispanic immigrants are. You're like, no, we can't survive with them. And it's like, well, they are the group that you say like you want ruling everything. If your internal divisions are so great already, I don't think your ultimate vision is going to play out very well. But anyway, he said, I'm not a Republican and I don't care that much. And I'm not going to turn out. He said this on his live stream on Rumble after the RNC event concluded. He said, I don't even really care. I'm not energetic. I'm not enthusiastic. I'm not leaving my house to vote. Vote for what? For JD Vance and Usha? I'm not voting for this. I'm not lending my credibility to this. He added, as a real conservative, as a real right-wing individual, you could not force me to care about this. You could not bribe me to care about this. I don't care. I don't want to look at it anymore. So this is not like Curtis is saying, which is like veiled support, but like knowing this is him like actually being pissed off at the Republicans.
Yeah. Wow.
Let's go with Richard Spencer. I deeply regret voting and promoting Donald Trump in 2016.
Oh, wow.
Now, here we can begin to get into why these people hate him. And I think, this is a really common thing you'll see across this.
Yeah.
He says, to the people of Iran, there are millions of Americans who do not want war. We do not hate you, and we respect your nation and its history. After our traitorous elite is brought to justice, we hope to achieve peace, reconciliation, and forgiveness. Basically, they want the state of Israel destroyed, and they support anyone who's attempting to do that, whether it's Iran or Gaza or anything like that. And as such, they do not like that and Trump is as pro-Israel as you get. When I was in Israel, this was right after he moved the embassy there, when everyone was like, oh my God, you can't move the embassy to Jerusalem. Like, that's horrible, and it's going to cause all sorts of, and he's like, YOLO. He does it. And Israel loves it. They're like broadcasting his face on everything. So, obviously he doesn't give a flying F what these people think. And the new right generally doesn't. Most of the new right is fairly pro-Israel. We can get into why later in this. Now, what did David Duke have to say? Well, David Duke said, I'm sorry, when I say pro-Israel, I mean pro-Jewish. A lot of people are like, oh, no, it's only the Zionists. It's not being anti-Jewish to be anti-Israel. And then I point out, depending on the poll you're looking at, it's between 85 and 95% of Jews would be categorized as Zionists. And so if you're saying, oh, I don't hate the Jews, I just hate 95% of Jews, or like, I don't hate the Christians, I just hate the ones who think that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, or something like that. It's like, well, I mean, that's pretty close to a perfect circle. And if you know Jewish history, you can understand why they might not feel comfortable in a state where they're a minority. But anyway, the next here we have David Duke. So David Duke said, I endorse—
David Duke is the KKK guy, right? Or what?
The guy who runs the KKK, yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure. I'm not— here's the other thing is as people who are frequently accused of being adjacent to such people, I mean, I think Trump experiences too. There are often insinuations that were related to people, and I have no idea who they are, or I have no idea what this phrase means.
Yeah, they're like, say you hate this person. And I'm like, I don't know who this person is or what.
Yeah, or they're like, this sounds an awful like what this, for example, when Trump was campaigning and he planned to have a speech at Madison Square Garden. Okay, like really major venue. Okay, where like many people, and suddenly the media is like, he's trying to recreate a NAZI rally that was in Madison Square Garden in 1940. It's like, how do you know this much obscure lore from pre-World War II? Like this.
It's because at their house there's like at every Guardian reporter's house there's a secret room they open and it's full of Nazi memorabilia.
I mean, yeah, like it just seems like the biggest aficionados of history and like collectors of memorabilia and aficionados of obscure facts are progressive people who use it for witch hunting purposes, or perhaps because they're really the racist ones. I don't know, but it's just so frustrating. So that's why I asked, because honestly,
and I'd also point out, as I'm saying these names, is these are people who are accused of being racist. I don't know if they're actually racist. I haven't done time to think about
it. Right, because that's I mean, a lot of people accuse us of being racist, and here we are. So I don't know.
Adjacency to Trump was used as justification to argue Trump is racist.
Right.
And these are people who I believe, if they had been at an event or something like that, might be the type of people who would make, say, Black people or gay people or Jewish people going to that event feel uncomfortable. And I think that this is part of the key, and it's what we'll get to later, is this is the right's woke problem. Like the wokeism is the left's mirror of this audience. If you go to an event and you're a cis white male, these people will make you feel uncomfortable. They will harass you. They have really good ties within the administration and can get into the administration and actually can make laws and stuff like that. The right has taken this toxic faction, sucked out the venom and spit it in a toilet. Like they themselves now feel uncomfortable going to right-wing rallies. And that's why if you look at this last cycle where Kamala was trying to argue Trump's racist, Trump's all this, when black people went to his rallies, when gay people went to his rallies, they're like, wait a second, I fucking love being here. And not only that, one of the lies that you will hear from this audience about themselves is that they are the foot soldiers and like Trump needs to like appeal to them to win election cycles, right? Like they're the people actually. That's not true. Who's our foot soldiers? Who's our real foot soldiers? Scott Presler.
He said he'd come back, and today he did.
Last time.
Scott Presler, the gay, is our real foot soldier. Scott Presler.
Fucking with the Amish. Yeah, just like a bunch of really cool doers. Yeah, and I genuinely. Now I did once have a conversation with someone who turned out to two people. I can think of two people in my entire life who I've spoken, no, three, because there was one childhood girl like was like in the 5th grade who like actually were definitely racist. But also I'm like, where are these racists? Like most people are, it's just weird to me.
They're just incredibly rare. They don't, and you can see this.
Like they're out there in droves and they're everywhere and they're
this is actually a really important point. They do not, and you can see this in the data, exist in the Republican voting base at a differential level than within the Democratic voting base.
Yes.
And here I'm talking about mainstream, old school, I hate blacks racist, not like a redefinition of racism around wokeism, which I also believe is accurate. But I'm just saying like the I hate blacks type racist, the I hate Jews type racist, the I hate gays type, they actually vote for Democrats at the same rate as they vote for Trump. And you can see this in the data. So I will note here that what you're seeing is one, they're incredibly rare in reality. In the same way that actual far wokies are rare in reality. But the Democratic Party has made their rallies, their events, their protests like honey to a fly for these incredibly rare woke variety humans. Whereas Trump rallies have become very, very toxic to these types of people, and they don't want to be there. They don't want to have anything to do with it anymore. They see him as a traitor. And that is why I think in large part he's been so successful at breaking this Democrat narrative that he's a racist. Because like, for example, the Republicans have this narrative like Kamala's woke. Kamala's not woke. And we'll be talking about this in a future episode. But she has not scared away the wokes yet. She hasn't put out, the onion to the vampires to get them out of the building yet. Trump did that with the racist, and we'll be talking about how he did that so successfully. So David Duke, head of the KKK, said, I endorse for president of the United States Green Party candidate, Dr. Jill Stein. Although Dr. Jill and I obviously have our differences on important issues, she is the only candidate who speaks clearly against the war in the Middle East. He acknowledged that his endorsement of a far left candidate would quote unquote shock some of his supporters, but said his decision is based on, quote, what is good for white European people as well as all of humanity, end quote. So, I mean, these are not like roundabout endorsements. These are who these people want to win, and it is for one reason. They want the Jewish state gone. So, and this has actually hurt a lot of them now that the Republicans have become the pro-Israel party and Dems have become the anti-Israel party, even though the Dem leadership didn't get this particular memo. They'd do a lot better in the polls if they did, but I think they're afraid of their donor class. But here I'd add another person here who's really interested in this, Ann Coulter. So Ann Coulter is not, like, people will be like, oh, she's a racist because she said this stuff about Mexicans. She almost married a black guy. Like, she's not a racist in a generic term, right? But she also falls into this category of having, I guess I'd call it an ethno-nationalist bent to some of her talking points around Hispanics.
Are there any suggestions how we might help?
How about we get rid of all the Mexicans?
And I think that things start to fall into place when we study Ann Coulter's mindset as to why these people don't have families. But we'll get to that in just a second. Going to shelve that for just a second. But she has says about Trump that she sees him as an awful, awful person and that she can't trust him as far as she can throw him. Now, the person who I think does the best in terms of calmly explaining all of this is Leather Apron Club. Leather Apron Club has a anti-Semitic and anti-gay, I'd say, bias to a lot of the stuff he puts out there. But I should be clear, when a lot of people say those words, they mean them negatively. And I mean those words no more negatively than I would say that Simone and I have a filio-Semitic bias, a pro-Jewish bias in our stuff, and a pro-normal gay bias in our stuff.
Mhm.
And just as that leads to some bias in the way that he interprets things, it leads to bias in the way we interpret things. But it is because of that separate perspective that he has that is so divorced from my own that I have actually gained a lot of insight into the world by watching his videos, because he just sees the world so differently than I do. And I generally respect him as an intellectual. But while I respect him as an intellectual, I also am not sad to see him leave the Republican Party. And I am not sad to see people like him leave the Republican Party, because it is with the exit of him that we get the entrance of genuine human stars like Scott Presler. Cleaning up cities that are trashy, just getting out there and fixing things, getting out the Amish vote, likely winning Pennsylvania for Trump, could have been critical in winning the election. And if we adopt these types of people's ideology, which you'll see, he wants us to be harsher on gay people and stuff like that, not support gay marriage. It just wouldn't work. 70% of Americans now support same-sex marriage. And of young Republicans, 18 to 29, 64% say they support same-sex marriage. So like his perspective couldn't even win with like next generation's Republicans. We are not losing anything as these people leave the room. I am sorry about that, but we're not. And it's not just that. I note here, it's also that these people are just like much less pleasant than Scott Presler and the normal gays. As they exit and the normal gays enter, and the
party becomes a lot more fun. Right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a more fun party. I'm sorry, guys. Like, you were cool. I kind of enjoyed our intellectual debates, but as you leave the room, like, things are getting better. Scott Presler, frankly, is a more decent human being than people like Nick Fuentes and a lot of these other people who we see. They're not going out cleaning up cities. They're not getting out doing the ground game. So
Well, I think, yeah, I think now also we are entering an age in which hopefully there's interest in building up rather than tearing down. And I'm being selective in what I say here, because obviously there's a huge interest in tearing down the rotten, old, broken elements of our society, government, and businesses. But then that a lot of that interest in tearing down what doesn't work is driven by a very deep and optimistic desire to build up. And it's so much more fun talking with these people who are interested in the post-apocalypse rebuild rather than just it's the apocalypse, everything is terrible, I hate everyone, these people suck.
Well, they're fighting for an aesthetic vision. It's basically a cargo cult. They had this idea of what conservatism used to be, maybe because they were like raised by like a single mother and they never met a real conservative and they never had a real man there to tell them, like, actually, this is what conservatism in America is. And a splinter faction of the conservative movement took over some of the party's policy for a while. And it was a splinter faction. People can be like, no, the theocrats were always the mainstream. They were fucking not. With what authority do I say this? With the authority that my grandfather was a long-serving conservative congressman, that my dad was a finalist, one of the final two candidates for 2 senior positions within the Reagan administration, specifically being the guy who did connections between the State Department and the Defense Department. And when he was running for that, the guy who kept him out became the no-name person at the time, Pat Buchanan. And he didn't like my dad because my dad had more nuanced opinions on things like abortion, and he wanted a strict line when that wasn't even a mainstream conservative issue yet. And I think that that sort of shows how they took over for a period when the average conservative voter was never about all of that. And they took over for a bit, and now they've been kicked out, but they're acting like, and these people who grew up without strong conservative influences in our lives, we've talked about this in some of our videos on Andrew Tate, where Andrew Tate is someone who's never had a masculine influence in their life, idea of what a masculine influence looks like. And because of that, they end up following, if you think of the movie Gladiator, I think a good differentiation here is, are you the emperor or are you Maximus? Are you the person who is okay with diversity within their ranks, who people want to follow because they're going out on the street, like Scott Presler, who's absolutely a Maximus character, going out and saying, there's trash on the streets, I'm going to clean it up, because if not me, who does? Or are you the person who spends your day on YouTube gatekeeping?
Mm-hmm. Are you tearing down, or are you building up?
Yeah, like we've tried to build with the Collins Institute an alternate school system. We try to build things with the EA stuff. We've been funneling money to lots of organizations doing really cool research. We have been building up, where a lot of these individuals just focus on gatekeeping and basically just masturbating this conservative aesthetic basically in a corner. And so I think as people like us come into the movement, if people like Scott Presler come into the movement, they're leaving the movement. What we've seen is, one, we can win with this alliance and win big. We're better off without them.
Oh yeah.
And two, that they never, and people can be like, well, what about the Bible? And I'm like, bro, have you even like read the Bible? Like the Bible's actually pretty clear that it is not about Sharia law. That's like, these people want like Muslim nonsense. Okay. The Bible says render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Okay. It explicitly argues for a separation of church and state and no legislating morality at the state level. The state is not supposed to do that if you're a real Christian. And if you want to give up Christianity, just do what Tate did and become a Muslim and whatever. At least you're being honest then. But anyway, I'm going to play the Leather Apron Club clip here. And I think he makes a really strong argument from his perspective.
Don't vote. And no, right off the bat, this is not a satire video. I'm earnestly telling you that it may not be in your best interest to vote this election cycle. I'm mostly talking to conservatives and right-wingers here, but to vote for a candidate is to assent to their platform, to signal to those running their campaign that you approve of the messaging that they have put out.
Our message to gay Americans tonight is this: you're free to marry who you want, if you want, without the government standing in your way.
And I think that, frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if me and Trump won just the normal gay guy vote. Because, again, they just wanted to be left the hell alone.
But what should you do if, like so many other conservatives, you see the Republican Party shifting ever further away from real conservative values? It's not at all an original thought to say that modern-day conservatives are the liberals of 10 years ago, and for good reason. What about if you're an anti-war conservative? Trump has repeatedly signaled his undying support for Israel at a time when tensions are close to boiling over in the region.
Okay, and what's the gist of his argument?
The gist of his argument is he can't support a party that supports things like gay rights and that has normal gays in leading positions within it, and that has somebody like J.D. Vance who says that normal gay men will vote for Trump.
So he's like, he's against the Catholic Church too? I mean...
He's against, look, he has this vision of what a conservative is that is based on what progressives think a conservative is, and not what
Isn't that funny? Yeah. That there is a group of people, like you say, the cargo cult phenomenon, who believe conservatism is the stereotype presented by progressives of conservatives. And I would say that there are progressives who exist on the opposite end of that, who are the woke pantomime that the right demonizes.
I absolutely agree, but the difference is that in the Progressive Party, and we'll be talking about this in the next video, they have taken the reins of power and are the people at all the events. In the
right. They turn it into a caricature, and they completely lean into the point of absurdity, and then they're rewarded and given a promotion. Whereas when that's turned into a pantomime and taken to a place of absurdity by the right, it falls off a cliff and is no longer a part of the right. It's not on the landmass anymore.
With these events, they're like, wait, this isn't what I thought I was. I thought I was joining what my single mom told
like
me.
where are the tiki torches? Why aren't you handing out the tiki torches in the khaki pants? And we're like, well, we don't have them. This was never real. And then they leave, and then we're fine. And so that's great.
Yeah, and I think that there was a while where Trump didn't understand how to burn these people so hard. And in this election, he's done a very good job of surrounding himself with gay heroes like Scott Presler, surrounding himself with people who are like, hey, you guys need to knock this shit the fuck off. People like us or rising parts of the new right who are like, yeah, we're not playing any of this nonsense. People like Elon, who the right will be like, did you know that he's banning people for anti-Semitic stuff? And like, he says free speech. And it's like, yeah, well, I mean, we mean free speech with, in reason, and you guys have passed out of reason, and so fuck off. We don't want to play this game with you. You're not useful to us. You're not useful to passing an agenda when humanity's dealing with very short timelines. Civilization is crumbling, and you're in the corner masturbating with something that can't win because 70% of the electorate hates the idea. Like, what are you thinking? You don't even care about winning anymore. It's just about feeling cool yourself. And I think that that's the core thing that everyone got sick of these people for, is they were pushing ideas that can't win elections. Now, I also want to talk about them going extinct. Because that's the other thing about these people is they tell people, well, fertility rates are falling, civilization's falling apart. Here is something that used to work, and so I'm going to do that. Now, I point out to them as a student of history, no, what you're doing isn't something that used to work. It was never a thing. It's a weird cargo cult that you have created off of what Hollywood said conservative culture was in the 1950s, even though it never was that. My granddad was conservative culture in the 1950s. Excuse me, I think I know what conservatives represented in the 1950s. And my granddad, I even remember what he told me about Jewish people growing up.
Okay, what did he tell you?
Oh, he goes, there's some people in my church, because he was a very strict Baptist, who say that Jews are going to hell. And he's like, but one of my best friends is Jewish, and I know Jewish people, and Jewish people are good people. And I don't believe that a good God sends good people to hell. This was a devout Baptist, okay? And so that might have influenced some of my beliefs around Jewish people. Like, I believe in multiple true religions, like strict followings of both Christian and Jewish faith.
Yeah.
Accurate. But
you got to commit, but there are many ways you can commit, and different commitments work better or best for different people.
Yeah, and I think that they think that this wasn't what conservatives were back then, and it was what conservatives were back then. They've just been lied to by the media, and they're like, well, what about the Klan? Well, the Klan was never a conservative movement. The Klan was a Democratic movement. It was supported the Democrats. And they're like, what about the party flip? The party's never fully flipped. There was a slight flip within one era, but there was never a full party flip. The party flip that people talk about around the Klan and stuff like that, that was no bigger than the party flip that happened with the Trump election. So you could even say, okay, well, then they flipped back since then, because Trump has flipped what the parties fight for. But what I also want to point out here is if you follow these people, this rotten deviation of the perfect Christian lifestyle that they claim to be pitching doesn't work. Okay? This rotten idea of white ethno-nationalism in the United States. Now, I'm actually okay with ethno-nationalism in like European countries, because like whatever, like that's actually their country. But in the United States, no, fuck off. But the cultures that they're pushing for that don't seem to work. So you look at something like Richard Spencer, right? 2 kids, divorced. Okay? Nick Fuentes, he's a pretend virgin.
Virginity, remember, a virgin body has the morning sheen of an unopened flower and the freshness of secret springs. It's your choice, ladies. Hold on to your glorious ripe fruit, or comprende?
By that, what I mean is he's one of these like reclaimed his virginity virgins.
Maybe I shouldn't, Coach Wolf.
Jerry, if you're worried about your past, don't. This is a great opportunity to start fresh.
Even though this morning I thumbed a ride and made a little lunch money?
Jerry, I'm giving you a chance to reclaim your virginity.
What? Don't think about sex, don't think about sex, don't think about
Hey, Jerry.
sex. Hello!
I was wondering...
Wondering what? If you could get me behind the dumpster, hike up my skirt, and pound home, well, I'm a virgin now. And this is one blushing rose you are not gonna deflower.
Now, he doesn't say this publicly, but I have it on pretty good authority that he's not actually a virgin and that he was conceived with IVF. So he's Catholic-ish. So
just for the record, I've met actually at this point several pretty devout Catholics who weren't informed that they were conceived via IVF until way later in their lives. Like their parents just didn't tell them. So it doesn't surprise me if that would be true. It's not at all unusual.
It's a weird new Catholic thing, as we point out. The Catholic Church came up with this 200 years ago. Pope Pius IX, or Syllabus of Errors, added this. He's the guy who did the ripping the penises off all the statues. None of the great Catholic leaders in history thought this. Augustus of Hippo didn't think this. St. Thomas Aquinas didn't think this. It's this weird new thing that is going to die out when 60% of the population in the developed world is infertile by 2060, which is what we already see in the data. Anyway, so Nick Fuentes, yeah, okay, Nick Fuentes, if your way of living works so well, where's your wife? You know, why
don't you get a job? Get a goddamn job, Al. You got a negative attitude. That's what's stopping you. You got to get your act together.
Okay, next, David Duke, divorced, 2 daughters, so below population rate, denounced him. Couldn't find anything on Alex. Well, that's what he goes by, the Leather and Apron Club guy. But he's never mentioned a wife and kids and doesn't. I don't know. You know how you can tell a lot about a person just looking at their face? He does not scream dad to me. He screams kid. And people often undergo physiological changes when they become.
Oh yeah,
dad.
the hormonal profile change that dudes go through when they become dads it's real. It's real. Dad bod is real. Dad face is real.
Well, dad face is real because you're changing, you know. And I bet AI would probably be able to tell dad faces with like an 80% likelihood.
Yeah. I gotta say, by the way, Malcolm, fatherhood looks really good on you. Like when I compare pictures of you from when I first met you, when I already thought you were banging hot, but like now,
yeah, I'll put some pictures of
you're
me
more
before
chiseled
with
now.
dad.
You're more chiseled. What is going on? It's the opposite of what I expected.
Well, I mean that happens to dads. This is very dad face.
Well, normally the stereotype of dad bod is beer gut. It's softer, and I don't like who guts are softer, as you know.
Well, I know, I agree, but I think that there is a softness to the face of people who aren't fathers that you don't see in fathers, which you will see in pictures before and after I became a dad. And I think that people actually sort of like instinctually know this difference. They will look at online influencers who are dads versus ones who aren't dads. And the ones who aren't dads come off as, even if they're older, like a Nick Fuentes or something like that, as like plucky youngsters. But the dads, you see them and you're like, oh, that's a dad. Like they bring like a something to the room that's a little different. And I don't know what it is. I actually think it comes off as not an authority, but almost sort of a stodgy acceptance of reality, which is best represented in something like the person you expect to tell a dad joke. The world is not as edgy to them anymore. And they're not interested in being edgy. They're interested in what works. And I think this is why the Bible, and I'll put the exact quote here in editing.
The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of an overseer, he desires a noble task. This is an overseer of the church, like a bishop or a church leader or a preacher. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband to one wife, a sober-minded, self-controlled, and respectable and hospitable person able to teach. So you must be the husband to one wife. That's it. It's not vague. I love it when I go to Catholic things on this. They go, it was a metaphor. It's a fucking metaphor. No, it wasn't a fucking metaphor. You guys just ignore the Bible. Or it'll say, well, it says a husband to one wife. What it means by this is that you can't have more than one wife, but it's totally okay to have no wives. Well, what it definitely doesn't mean is that everyone in a church leadership position should have no wives, right? That's super obvious. And this is why when I look at the various Christian denominations, I think that something like Catholicism is much less Christian than something like Mormonism, because at least Mormons have like a good reason for why they ignore parts of the Bible. They can be like, well, I got some new scripture here. I might disagree with that new scripture, but at least they got a reason. I would note here, just because I expect some people to bring this up, they're like, well, what about Corinthians 7, where it says, well, in some ways, a single person might be better at preaching than a non-single person. And I would point out here that the line from Timothy I was laying out there is about requirements for a role. Now, what's the preface to the part in Corinthians? It says, now as a concession, not a command, I say this. So what here he's saying is, well, in some ways it might be okay to be single in these narrow circumstances. Not that this is something that a leadership position within the church should have.
Says very explicitly, unmarried men should not be allowed to be preachers in the church. Now, a lot of people might wonder how Catholics square that. I don't fuck. Whatever you want to say, but this is in the Bible. Unmarried men are not supposed to be people you take advice from. By the way, I went to look at more of this because I heard when I was looking up, I think it was David Duke, his wife divorced him and went for the guy who founded Stormfront, a friend of his. So sad as well. So this was Stephen Donald Black. So I was like, okay, guy who founded Stormfront, one kid has denounced him. Then you look at Ann Coulter, for example, no kids. Not only no kids, but she was engaged 10 times apparently. I'm like, that's a culture that's not
Something's
working.
wrong. Yeah, when it's one of those things when if you call everyone else an asshole, it probably means you're the asshole, you know? Something's
Yeah.
just not right there. Something's not right.
Well, here what I'd say, and my takeaway from all of this is that the reason why these people have resorted to this more, I guess I'd say like ethnocentric philosophies in response to what they see as like low white fertility rates
Mhm.
is because they don't have a cultural solution to fix that. And so all they can do is do things like close the borders to try to maintain the quote unquote purity of their region in the same way like the South Koreans did. But like clearly it's not working out well for the South Koreans. If, for example, like let's say, suppose Ann Coulter is like, I am concerned about this American culture going extinct, right? And so I want to keep out Hispanic people from entering this culture. The problem is that if she's not having kids, it's not the Mexicans who made her have no kids. Like the number of Hispanic people in this country had nothing to do with the fact that none of her engagements worked out, had nothing to do with the fact that she hasn't even been able to like use a sperm donor to get pregnant, has nothing to do with the fact that she hasn't even adopted. You know, these are all choices that she has made or the result of the culture that she has adopted being a non-functioning
Well,
culture.
hold on though. I wanna talk about the line between toxic ethno-nationalism that's just destructive and pointless and hateful versus cultural pride breeding friendly competition. So one of the reasons we talk about, for example, Israel having such a great birth rate, despite being modern and gender egalitarian and prosperous and highly educated, is that they have this feeling of otherness. They have this strong sense of cultural pride. Now, they're not trying to shove out others. They're not, I wouldn't say they hate on others, but they're definitely proud of who they are. And I'm sure that internally they will laugh at, point at, and criticize others. Where's the line between what I would call sportsman-like rivalry, where you're not hateful towards someone, you just dunk on them the same way that you would dunk on a rival football team, versus that kind of hateful, oh no, I'm not dunking on them, I want a final solution to them. Like where's the line? Because I think that you
Well,
need to have that
the
healthy
line is
competition and that internal pride for a group, be it cultural or even industrial or nationalistic, and then and prenatalism.
well, I think the line is clear and bold. So the modern conservative movement is a united network of clans. That is what
Uh-huh.
America is now. It's the
Yeah.
united clans. And that's what America always was. That's what the different states were. It was a united group of different cultures working to a common cause that competed against each other. And I think one of the things that the left gets wrong is they think you can't have pride in your clan while still ultimately being part of a united clan-based network. And a sci-fi universe, I think, does a very good job of this because I've been playing a game in this universe recently. You guys should check it out if you like video games. I've been loving it. Is Mech Warrior Clans, which is about the clans who come back and attack the inner sphere and everything like this. And this is a sci-fi world far in the future where every one of the clans that makes up the clan system is very distinct. They have their own cultural practices. They have their own cultural identity. They have some level of own internal governance system. They kill each other occasionally. They get into fights occasionally, but there is a system of rules that all of them obey in these conflicts. And you can say, oh, well, I mean, this is like some new American thing. No, in every period that Western civilization has thrived, we have relied on this mechanism. Look at the ancient Greek city-states. You had the clans, which were the city-states, Athens, Sparta, Thebes, etc., who would compete against each other, sometimes in sort of ritualized competitions like the Olympics, sometimes in direct conflict. But they always knew the true enemy was the barbarians, the outsiders, the people outside of the clan network. You look at the great period of European history, the clans, the Crusader kings, they would fight amongst each other. They would have ritualized combat things. They'd have other ritualized, formalized ways of competing. But when a crusade was called, they all knew what the other was. It was the same with the Muslim kingdoms during their great period. This system of united clans is the way that, and if you can watch our One Civilization video, the one civilization works best. We work best when you have people with different philosophies, i.e. hypotheses about how to live, being able to have pride in those hypotheses and competing against others. You can look at our ribbing of stuff like Catholic philosophy on this, right? Like we rib on Catholics all the time, but there is not like a genuine animosity in that ribbing. I wouldn't say that we should keep Catholics out of the country or that, you know, like anything like that. And we actually take the exact opposite perspective of that when we talk about it. And I think we as a world need to get back to a perspective where I can say, I have pride in who I am, and I, as a hypothesis, think that my culture is better than yours. But that is only proven by how many kids I have and how many of those kids stay in that culture and how much money I make. When I say how much money I make, I mean my ability to contribute to the economy, right? I wouldn't consider clans that live off the state to have any value to the system.
So you're open to the potentiality that you're wrong.
Yes, I'm open to the potentiality I'm wrong, and these people aren't. When they close the borders, it's in a way saying, and I do think that we should close the borders to low-skilled immigrants. I think that's just like a no-duh thing. As my grandfather said, he said, you can't have heavy social services and porous borders. You have to choose one. I believe that. This has nothing to do with Hispanic people or anything like that. It's just in common sense.
Yeah.
And since we can't get rid of all the social services our country offers, we have to close the borders. It's the only solution. Otherwise, we're going to disproportionately draw low-skilled people in who want to live off of the social services that we have that are disproportionately higher than those in their birth country. So, okay, like that's a normal thing to want. But these people know they're afraid of the way our culture may change. And the reason they're afraid of that is they recognize, and I think rightfully so, that their iterations of our culture are unable to motivate fertility. And we'll talk about this in a future video because I want to do a whole video on this. But pluralistic cultures are intrinsically strong cultures.
Yeah.
Strength.
Okay, yeah. So I guess the other losing element of this is in response to encountering hardship and low fertility, their response is tear down other cultures and not fix yourself from within, which is one reason why, one, we're really skeptical of groups that are trying to impose their will on other groups and like grow that way, basically grow by forcing conversion, versus groups that are breaking off on their own, innovating in creative ways and finding ways to just internally be great and just do better.
Yeah. Well, and this is, I think, a core difference between people with these two mindsets, how they look at other groups. So somebody with one of these mindsets, they might look at a group like the Jews and be like, oh, Jews are doing uniquely well on tests. They are making a uniquely high amount of money.
Yeah.
They are, winning a unique amount of Nobel Prizes. We should cut them down. Like we need to stop this from happening because it's not our people succeeding.
Prevent them from being promoted, make it harder for them to get into good schools. Yes.
Whereas you have people like us who see this and we're like, oh, what are the Jews doing right? What can we learn from? You could look at this as like, it's so funny that these people who would degrade things like the BLM movement aren't able to see their own similarity there, where the BLM movement is like, well, if white people are earning more money or achieving more, they must be stealing it from us, instead of being like, well, maybe you have some cultural problems you can work on and you can look at some aspects of quote unquote white culture and try to adopt it to do better yourselves. Even when you control, for example, for wealth, like if we're just talking about like problems, for example, even if you control for wealth, homicide rates are higher in Black communities. Like, so that's a cultural thing. Well, it's either that or it's a genetic thing. And I'm not even going to take, I don't think it is. I think it's a cultural thing, right? Those are like the two real explanations there. And, or you could say maybe there's not enough police presence in those areas and then it's like, oh, so you want more police in Black neighborhoods? Basically, there's no answer to this that works well for progressives. And so it's one of these inconvenient facts. But I think that we can learn from people who are doing things right. And Jews aren't just out competing us, they're also outbreeding us. They have more kids. Even secular Jews are above repopulation rate fertility in Israel. Like, obviously this is something I should be learning from, but if I'm in this tear down instead of and this is what I mean, like strengths leads to pluralism. If you believe that you understand where anyone's out competing, you're like, okay, I understand they're out competing because of this, and this, which is like what this channel is about. And I'm going to steal those parts of their cultural technology. And I actually think that their cultural technology is flawed here, 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 and here, and I can beat them. It is my belief in my cultural superiority, the culture that I'm building for this family, that leads me to be pluralistic, because I know that in an open and fair competition, we will win. Or at least be one of the major competitors. That's also what leads me to a lot of people can be like, why are you so philiosemitic? Because they're winning.
Yeah.
Like
you are interested in those who have winning strategies.
Yes, they're going to matter in the future. It's useful to build clan alliances with them. Don't be like the Nazis and kick out all your smart scientists, because you know what those your Jewish scientists. This is a bit like that Biden line there, because you know what happens? They're going to build a big ass fucking bomb and drop it on your face one day. So don't do that. Work with the people who are different from you and find ways to work together. Because that is what I think is one thing that makes the Jews like really good, persistent allies for any cultural group, is they religiously don't have a dogma to convert your kids, whereas the wokes do. A lot of these like Catholic integralists do. They're Highlandering it. They're telling me, I'll come for your kids one day. We can never really be allies. And so every alliance is like a fair weather friend alliance. And it's not what works well for Western civilization, as we have seen. The period of Western civilization where we had one of the lowest advancements, like of our golden ages, was the Roman period, because it was too homogenous.
Yeah. Well, and here's what I've noticed most about the super high fertility Catholics, which are not really represented by the Pope or the central bureaucracy. They are converting incredibly well, and they have a very high birth rate. So they have the perfect combo. But the only way they're doing that is by having incredible communities and cultural amenities that make it a no-brainer for anyone who believes in having kids and being there in the future to join them, because they're great. They love them. You know, they have the best networks and referrals and support groups and just other families to hang out with. So you convert because they're better. And that is the way to go, is you attract people and you boost your own birth rate just by imparting fitness, which is exactly what culture is supposed to do.
Exactly. Well, and I do love this vision of the new right as the united clans. When we show up, you know, you've got your Hasidic Jews, you've got your Mormons, you've got your Catholics, you've got the weirdos like us or Elon who have these weird like technophilic beliefs. And we all look different. We all have slightly different takes on things. And what we agree on is we want freedom of thought. We want our kids to be safe. We want a basically functional government. And we want the freedom to be different from each other. And that's something the left can't offer. When you go to their events, it is one way of being. You are allowed to have a different skin color, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
You go to our events, the Hasidic Jews think nothing like us. Catholics think nothing like us. We rib on them all the time, you know? We rib on Hasidic Jews. I've called Hasidic Jews witches before. Not all Hasidic Jews, specifically the group that I am less favorable to is the Chabad group, but that's a big portion of the Hasidic Jews who would be watching this. That video, you know, I got some calls after that one. But they know when I say that, I'm not saying like I hate them or anything like that. I'm saying, look, I've read the same text you do, and I have a different interpretation of them. Even within a Jewish context, even within a Jewish theological context, I have a different interpretation, and that's fine. An active theological discussion is what makes a theology strong. All right.
That's the whole point.
Love you, Simone. I absolutely love, and we were so lucky that all of these individuals signaled that all of the racists and all of the anti-Semites and all the homophobes came out and said, we aren't voting for Trump and our followers aren't voting for Trump. And so we got to see what happened when they didn't vote for Trump, when they didn't come out to the rallies, when they weren't excited. And you know what happened? We did better than ever.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm happy with you. Go join the Democrats. They're more like you anyway.
Yeah,
They've got
they're
the whole ethno
pretty
hierarchy.
racist. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you'll
You'll
fit
fit
right
in.
in.
When me and Brad first met, I didn't think we'd get along, but turns out we kind of agree on everything. Your racial identity is the most important thing. Everything should be looked at through the lens of race.
Jinx, you owe me a Coke.
We both think minorities are a united group who think the same and act the same.
And vote the same. You don't want to lose your black card. Sorry, I don't know. I just think we should
Roll back discrimination laws so we can hire based on race again. Jinx, now you owe me a Coke. Hey, tell him what you told me yesterday.
White actors should only do voices for white cartoon characters.
I've been saying that for years.
Fantastic there.
They'll get on like bread and butter.
Black people should only shop at black businesses.
I guess the only thing we really disagree about is I think white people are the root of all evil.
But what did I tell you, though? If we can narrow that down to a certain group of tiny-hatted white people, I think we can come to an understanding.
Technically, I don't consider Jewish people white.
Neither do I.
All right.
I love you.
I love you too. And this is again what I'm talking about. Kids, family, wife, love. These people never, ever, ever take an influencer seriously who's giving you life advice that doesn't have a good relationship with their spouse and kids.
If you care about having a spouse and kids,
I believe this very strongly. Like if that's your goal, if your goal is to have a surviving culture, you could look at somebody.
Then you have to look at life advisors who
you could look at somebody like
that.
Steven Crowder, right? Like, okay, he has a lot of good ideas about culture. I thought he was a competent person, but if he fails at his marriage, then I can't trust anything he says about the way that women should be treated, about the way that.
He's completely.
He failed.
Lost. Yeah.
You don't want to beat me or screw me? What kind of marriage is this? Bring a book.
Yeah, he failed. And we need to admit that whatever he thought about, the way you source a partner, the way you date, the way we should act sexually, the way we should act around pornography, the way we should act about all that, I can throw out the door because clearly he doesn't know what he's talking about from a functionalist perspective. And some people are from non-functionalist cultures, so this isn't going to land with them. They're like, but I like his aesthetics. And I'm like, okay, well, I my belief is you will go extinct. I might be wrong, but the data says I'm right. So bye-bye. Bye-bye, Nick Fuentes of the world. It was cute while you were here. This little thing you put on, it was cute. But it's over for you. And it's over for people like you.
No, it was cute, but it was wrong.
Isn't that cute? But it's wrong!
Isn't that cute? But it's wrong!
Love you, Malcolm.
Okay, tell me about trick or treat then.
Trick or treat is the part of trick or treating. You tell trick or treat,
It's. You want mac and cheese? Okay, it's trick or treat, smell my feet, tell me something good to eat.